welcome to the Business Standard Morning Show. I'm Nazia Iqbal, and here's a look at the stories for the day. The Reserve Bank of India's Monetary Policy Committee has hiked repo rate by 25 basis points. A Business Standard poll had also forecast the 25 basis point hike about 3 days ago. So with inflation coming under the RBI's comfort zone, will the central bank hit the pause button on further rate hikes? Bhashwar Kumar's report has the answer.
With regard to indication, it's not possible to, say anything. I have said it earlier also that in the current tightening cycle especially with regard to rates, we have refrained from giving any forward guidance because sometimes it can be, and quite likely sometimes, it may become counterproductive. So we are not giving any forward guidance. We have said that we will be extremely watchful of the incoming data as well as the outlook on inflation as well as what is happening in the overall economy. Based on that, we will decide going into the future months.
Answering questions after the latest Reserve Bank of India Monetary Policy Committee meeting, Governor Shaktikanta Das did not rule out further hikes in the repo rate. On February 8th, the MPC raised the repo rate by 25 basis points to 6.50%. This was done to bring inflation back towards the central bank's 4% target. The decision was not unanimous. 4 of the 6 members of the MPC voted in favor of the rate hike. The RBI MPC has slowed the pace of rate hikes for a second straight meeting. To ensure that inflation remains on target, the MPC also retained its stance of withdrawal of accommodation. And the decision on the stance also saw a voting pattern of 4:2. With the latest rate decision, the MPC has raised the repo rate by a total of 250 basis points since May last year. At 6.50%, the repo rate is at its highest since February 2019. Meanwhile, headline CPI inflation declined to a one-year low of 5.72% in December last year, staying within the central bank's 2 to 6% tolerance band. However, core inflation remained above 6%. Core inflation, which strips away the volatile components of food and fuel, has remained above 6% since May 2022. So, Governor Das reiterated that the stickiness of core inflation was a matter of concern and the RBI would need to see a decisive decline in inflation. Assuming an average price of $95 per barrel for crude oil, the MPC sees CPI inflation at 5.3% in FY24. Governor Das said geopolitical factors, non-oil commodity price pressures, and volatile crude oil prices would be the sources of risk on the inflation front. Governor Das also said that India's economic activity was holding up well, with the previous rate hikes still working their way through the system. So, further calibrated action was warranted to break the persistence of core inflation and to anchor inflation expectations. The governor emphasized that the RBI would continue to maintain a strong vigil on inflation. Against this backdrop, what do experts think are the chances of a pause in the rate hike cycle?
In my view, there would be a rate pause for the next couple of policies, and it could all be driven by data. So in case we do see that the inflation trajectory continues the way the RBI has spoken of, we may not be expecting any change from the RBI. And I think the reason as to why the RBI is being cautious is that it's not sure about core inflation and what could be any external factor affecting headline inflation.
Well, I think the RBI stance is appropriate in the sense that in these uncertain times, you want to keep your options open and you become more data-driven. Our sense is that we have reached the peak of the cycle, and I think we may see a pause from here on, and also a change in stance going ahead. But it all depends on what kind of data flows in.
Also, where do experts see real rates standing in the near future? And is a shift in stance likely in the coming April policy?
we are talking of a positive 1% real interest rate, which I think is quite acceptable from the point of view of the central bank. Now, in terms of change in stance, I don't think there will be any change of stance even in next policy. The reason is that I don't expect any of the inflation numbers to be significantly different from what the RBI has spoken of when they meet again in April.
Well, I think as far as the real rates are concerned, they've already touched the positive territory. And I think maybe 1.5% to 2% is what they will reach at some point. As far as the stance is concerned, they will now move towards the neutral stance if they don't hike rates in the next policy. Because that neutral stance still leaves you an option of either raising rates or leaving it unchanged or cutting rates.
The MPC pegged nominal GDP growth rate at 11.7% for FY24. Though RBI's panel did not give nominal GDP growth, it pegged real economic growth at 6.4% and retail price inflation at 5.3%. On the other hand, the budget assumed nominal GDP growth at 10.5%. Major figures such as taxes and fiscal deficit are estimated in the budget on the basis of the nominal economic growth projection. So, is the MPC projection of 11.7% likely to hold true? If yes, what will be the impact?
I think the number of 11.7% fits in well, because if you're talking of 6.4% growth in real GDP, 5.3% CPI inflation, if you add the two numbers, you do come to this number of 11.7%. Now, technically, of course, the difference between nominal and real GDP need not necessarily be the CPI inflation number. It's a GDP deflator, which is a derived number. So I really don't see any contradiction as such out here. The RBI has given a more realistic view, whereas the government is taking a more conservative view, which is the way it should be. Now, if this number of 11.7% is achieved, it will definitely work to the benefit of the government in the sense that your tax collections would continue to be as buoyant as what they were in 22-23.
Governor Das also said that higher RBI output, broad-based credit growth, improved capacity utilization, and the government's thrust on capital spending had improved the growth outlook. However, he cautioned that protracted geopolitical tensions and slowing external demand were downside risks. For its part, the MPC projects real GDP growth at 6.4% for FY24.
I think the factors which were driving growth in 22-23, like the pent-up demand phenomenon in both manufacturing as well as services, is something which is not going to get replicated in 23-24. So I assume that they are looking more in terms of some bit of revival in terms of private investment and maybe flattish consumption, so that we see growth moderating from 7 to 6.4%.
I think Eco Survey gave a range of 6 to 6.8, and 6.4 is actually just in between that. Our own call is 6% because we do see global headwinds trimming our exports and also flowing to the sectors which service those exports. So I think overall the economy still seems resilient, but this resilience will be tested in when the global growth slows down.
The RBI MPC has given itself more room to tighten borrowing costs in the future to rein in core inflation. And amid the prevailing uncertainty, its decisions going forward will be largely data dependent.
Inflation in airfare, meanwhile, was way higher than the overall inflation till few months ago, especially during the festivals in October and November. It has come down now. But did you know that the iconic aircraft, which made air travel affordable for most of us, is slowly but certainly flying into dust after over 5 decades of successful operation? The last aircraft of the revolutionary Boeing 747 series rolled out of the Boeing factory last week. The company has decided to halt its production. Tariq Ahmed's report takes a look at the legacy left behind by Boeing 747, also called Queen of the Skies. The journey of the Boeing 747 started during a fishing trail in Alaska in the mid-1960s. And during that leisure trip, Boeing boss William Bill Allen and Pan Am founder Juan Trippe envisioned an aircraft 3 times the size of any aircraft that existed then. They reached an informal agreement which later became a fable in the history of aircraft. Juan Trippe famously said, "If you build it, I will buy it." And for that, Boeing boss Allen replied, "I will build it if you buy it." What happened next was beyond belief. On April 13, 1966, Pan Am officially announced an order for 25 Boeing 747s. The cost was $525 million, which is approximately $4.8 billion today. The engineers and workers led by Joe Sutter didn't rest after. Boeing purchased 315 hectares of swampland north of Seattle to build the Everett facility, which is the largest building in the world by volume, and since then it became the home for the Boeing 747s. Before the third year of order, the first 747 was ready to fly. It ushered in the wide-bodies aircraft age and earned a name, the Jumbo Jet. The enormous size of the first 747, powered by 4 engines, was unbelievable, and people could hardly believe that such a thing could ever fly. First Boeing 747 took off on 21st January of 1970 from New York to London on 21st January of 1970. The design of Boeing 747 was a work of genius. The enormous size and the famous hump were its peculiarities. The hump was a result of a rounded nose in the front to allow the cargoes in. Joe Sutter designed the 747 in a way that it can carry huge amounts of cargo, which later made the 747s the favorite of cargo airlines. Initially, it carried 366 passengers, which increased to 524 in later variants. The semi-double-decker facility with a lounge and bar and the stairway were its unique interior characteristics. The 2-aisle fuselage was also first introduced in 747.
Any aviator is extremely close to the 747, and there was a reason why it was called the Queen of the Skies. I mean, just by the fact, the way that aircraft was made and what it delivered. So one of the biggest thing that 747 was able to achieve was the significantly long haul flights. And obviously there was a big race with regards to who would be able to come up with the largest aircraft to be able to deliver those kind of flights. So and that's when 747 rolled out. I mean, it was a huge moment for the industry.
Boeing 747 revolutionized the airline industry by making air travel affordable to a large number of people. Both in terms of affordability and safety, the 747 series had a huge impact in shaping the history of air traveling. The aircraft dominated both in the passenger and cargo fleets till 2000. In 1993, barely after 23 years, the 1000th of 747 was already sold. After the 1990s, despite the major upgradation in 2005, the prospect for Boeing 747 as a passenger aircraft has been going down. Adding to that, it faced competition from Airbus's similar wide-bodies model A380. But the demand for 747 models continued as a cargo aircraft. According to reports, in 1990, 28% of the total wide-bodied aircrafts in the world was 747s, and now is merely 2%. The domination of Boeing 747 among cargo aircrafts has also been depleting. From 71% in 1990, it has come down to 21% in 2022. But a considerable number of 747s are still serving the cargo shipments.
If you look at the 747, it had the ability to have the opening of the nose and allowing very large, odd-sized cargoes to be moved in that aircraft. So just the fact that the cargo capacity of that aircraft was so significant that it was, at the end of the day, you look at the economics, right? What is the cost of per kg of shipment from point A to point B, and the more number of cargo you can carry in a single flight, the lower per unit cost. So from that perspective, that aircraft had an amazing capacity to fly long haul with extremely odd sized cargoes, because you could have the nose being opened up, and you also had huge volume that could be carried on that aircraft.
Higher operating cost and emission are the main reason behind this depletion of once favorite 747s. The aviation industry has been keen on efficiency and lower emissions. Now the wide-bodied models like the A350 from Airbus and Boeing 777X are the most sought after by the airline companies for the same reasons.
One of the key reasons is the economics itself. When it started, the economics of 747 was what made it lucrative, right? It made flying more affordable. But then as time went on, as you know, 747 has 4 engines, right? Whereas there are other aircraft with similar capacity, if not more, a little bit more capacity, but which are flying using only 2 engines, right? You take the 777s, you take the A350s, 787s, right? So there are much more economical aircraft which consume less fuel.
Though the production of Boeing 747s has come to a halt, the aircraft will be continuing its services. According to Boeing historian Mike Lombardi, the Boeing 747s will be around even in 2069 on the centennial of this aircraft.
Even today, given a chance, 747 still, inspires an awe whenever you see one. So you have all the kids standing at an airport, and when they see a 747, they say, yeah, that's the aircraft that they want to really get into.
The quest for more fuel-efficient and profitable aircraft, which have 2 engines, has led to the end of an era in which wide-body 4-engine Boeing 747 ruled. But the 747 has landed a spot in the aviation history, and it will stay there. Shifting the focus back to the rate hike, the RBI move has weakened the sovereign bonds. The central bank status quo on its policy stance, with no signal that it will take the foot off the pedal, has dampened the market spirit. So, what is in store for bond markets going ahead after the RBI's policy outcome and the budget's market borrowing estimate for FY24? Harshita Singh answers in our next report.
The Reserve Bank of India's 25 basis point rate hike on Wednesday came in line with expectations. However, it did not leave the bond market particularly enthused as the central bank maintained its policy stance with a hawkish undertone and without giving any firm indication of a possible pause in the rate hike cycle going ahead. Bonds weakened with the yield on the benchmark 10-year government security rising 4 basis points to 7.35% as RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das reiterated his concern on sticky core inflation, which is easing at a slower pace. Economists read this as the RBI leaving room for further rate hikes ahead if inflation exceeds its projections. According to Dr. Aurodeep Nandi, economist at Nomura, the RBI governor's communication struck a somewhat hawkish note, flagging concerns on high core inflation, projecting confidence on growth, and flagging that monetary policy conditions are still not as tight as pre-pandemic levels. This does not bolt the door completely on further tightening. The policy arithmetic has changed from de facto policy tightening to a distinctly data-dependent mode. Our baseline view is a pause hereon. Besides, last week bond traders had cheered the budget's announcement of gross market borrowings of 15.4 trillion rupees for FY24, below the estimates of 16 trillion rupees. This led to the yield on the 10-year benchmark government bond settling at the lowest closing level since December 15, 2022. As an investment strategy, Puneet Pal of PGIM India Mutual Fund suggests investors increase their exposure to short duration products while selectively looking at dynamic bond fund categories as per their risk appetite.
So today's RBI's monetary policy was slightly more hawkish than expected. Market participants were expecting a 25 basis rate hike, which was delivered by RBI, but there was no change in the monetary policy stance, which was retained at withdrawal of accommodation. Some market participants were expecting a change in stance to neutral, which did not happen. Though RBI did mention that real rates are now in positive territory. So we think that RBI did not want to give any forward guidance in respect of rates, given the various uncertainties, especially global uncertainties. So RBI did mention about global uncertainties and also the fact that they want to retain the flexibility in terms of conduct of monetary policy, and that's why they did not change the stance nor give any forward guidance. So we think that going forward, the bond markets will continue to trade in a range. We expect the 10-year bond yield to trade in a range of 7.20 to 7.5 till March end. Overall, coming to the budget, the borrowings are higher than last year. But given the fact that FY23 borrowings by and large were non-disruptive in nature, we think FY24 borrowings will also sail through.
That said, equity markets will seek direction from their global peers today. Q3 earnings of LIC, Zomato, Bajaj Consumer, IRCTC, Lupin and MRF will also be on the radar.
Meanwhile, the race for clean energy is on. Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, or ONGC, is now planning to come up with a geothermal map of India. We know about nuclear, solar, hydroelectric and wind energies. But what exactly is geothermal energy? We explain it for you. On your way to Changtang Wildlife Sanctuary in Leh, the local guide will tell you about Puga and Chumathang regions of eastern Ladakh, which are rich in geothermal energy. That's the region where the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation of India is setting up the country's first geothermal power project. While the Ladakh region has the potential of generating geothermal power of 50 megawatts, India is still at a nascent stage of geothermal energy utilization. The Geological Survey of India estimates the country's tentative theoretical geothermal power potential at 10 gigawatts. So what is geothermal energy? Geothermal energy is an energy source that is stored in the form of heat beneath the Earth's surface. As we know, the deeper we go inside the Earth, the hotter it gets. It's called a geothermal gradient. The Earth's heat is generated at the core continuously by the decay of radioactive isotopes such as potassium, uranium, and thorium. Water that seeps into the reservoirs deep below the Earth's surface is heated by the underground temperatures and returns to the surface as steam. The steam comes out through the boundaries of tectonic plates and fissures as hot water springs. One of the common ways to tap into this geothermal energy is by using steam to turn large turbines which run electric generators. These reservoirs of hot water or geothermal resources exist in seismically active areas or are man-made deep inside the Earth's surface. Wells ranging from a few feet to more than 100 feet deep can be drilled into underground reservoirs to tap steam and hot water. It is then brought to the surface for use in a variety of applications, including power generation, heating and cooling systems, greenhouse, horticulture, and more. So how is it renewable? That's because Earth's core is a perpetual source of heat energy. However, temperature of a geothermal reservoir in use or its water levels may diminish over time. In case of the latter, surface water can be re-injected to maintain pressure and heated for repeat use. Unlike solar energy, which can't be produced at night, geothermal energy can be harnessed 24/7 round the year. Yet, geothermal energy has seen modest growth worldwide as compared to other renewable sources, especially wind or solar. This is due to its site-specific nature, the uncertainty involved with resource exploration, and high upfront cost. An exception is Iceland, which relies on geothermal sources for 66% of its total energy needs. India is home to rich sources of geothermal energy discovered in Ladakh, Cambay in Gujarat, Tatapani in Chhattisgarh, Khammam in Telangana, and Ratnagiri in Maharashtra, and more. ONGC's move to map the geothermal reservoirs across the country and harness them can be instrumental in achieving India's net zero targets by 2070.
I'm backed by the nation's trusted bank, SBI, the banker to every Indian.
India has proposed to harness 10,000 megawatt of geothermal energy by 2030 through active international collaboration. Well, that's all for today. For more news and analysis, please log on to business-standard.com. Thank you for watching.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.